please put your hands together and give a warm welcome to Major General Tim Brown.
Admiral Sharp, thank you for the kind words. When you asked me if I would jump at this opportunity, one of the things that really hooked my interest was, as an intelligence officer and a combatant command J2, we're used to being the one that has to answer all the questions and go through that inquisition of sorts. And now we get to turn the tables just a little bit to this panel of experts that we brought in. And so I get to ask the questions for the first time, which I'm really excited about. But I would encourage each of you to consider yourselves in that you're helping me as the moderator ask really good questions to take advantage of the time we have with these experts. Now, each of them has spent time in industry and also time in government. And starting with Carrie, if you wouldn't mind, can you talk to the team just a little bit, this audience, about what you've done in government and what you're doing on a couple different times in the private sector, and how they can connect with you in this forum, and then what you're passionate about for space.
Well, Tim, thanks so much. It's such a privilege to be here. Thank you, INSA and AFCEA, for putting together a great forum, and I just can't say how privileged I am to be on this stage with colleagues that I've known for a long time, but also particularly with Major General Brown. He was just so tremendous when I was in intelligence and security, as he was overseeing the broader defense intelligence and security enterprise, but then to go on and do Southcom J2, be the director of intelligence at UCOM. It just such a pivotal time. I mean, you have done a tremendous service to the nation and to Ukraine's fight for freedom. So I'm privileged to be on the stage with you. So I've looked at these issues from a variety of different vantage points, from my early 20s and as an aerospace engineer and space systems analyst, to spending time in Congress with the House Armed Services Committee and getting to see, really getting to experience, how do you put together what are all your tools in your toolkit to really move policy, move programs and budgets forward? How do you work across the aisle to get things done? And I'd say the NDAA we did pass, we're like, 62, 63 years there. So I think that's a testament to we can still do things in a bipartisan way. Spent time in DOD as the Deputy Undersecretary of Defense for Intelligence and Security, and that is where I got to see just how dedicated the men and women are, uniform, civilian, work in mission, day in, day out, with a lot of sacrifice and a lot of times not very much recognition and reward. Spent a little bit of time at a startup, Hawkeye 360. They're commercializing radio frequency collection and analysis, and I learned a foreign language there. I learned what TAMs and EBITDAs and all those things are that you don't really learn in government, but also how to get private capital working for national security. So now I'm at a think tank, CSIS. I lead their aerospace security project, and I get to bring together that cumulative body of knowledge and experience to think big thoughts, I guess.
And
Yes.
Dave, when the Russian invasion was really in its build-up phase and then kicked off, you were a key partner for UCOM. And can you talk about your experience in government and then in the private sector as well?
Certainly, thank you. Yeah, space has always excited me for its potential, and I didn't get to start working with space until 25 years ago. I became a payload operator for an IR missile warning system, and got to start working in the space domain, and I never really left. I was doing that as an aerospace engineer and military officer. Went to industry for a little while, came back into NGA, where I had the opportunity to continue working with new space systems, and oftentimes was asked, can you find new ways to use these systems, different methodologies to exploit the data from these systems, and worked on something called activity-based intelligence. But it always came back to this idea of more persistence is better, and more diversity of sensors is better, and we can continue making that happen. When I became the director of commercial operations at NGA, we saw the value and possibilities in the commercial market, in the private industry ecosystem, just on the cusp of about to deliver amazing ISR capabilities. And so we rapidly got a set of contracts stood up so that we could use these capabilities just before Russia invaded Ukraine. And thank goodness we did, because the companies, each and every one of them, was ready to lean forward and allow, Ukrainians to access their remote sensing information to defend their homeland. And it was just a privilege and an honor to be working in that environment and see the fruits of the labor in private industry pay off on the battlefield. And thank you, sir, for all the help that you provided in making that happen. And I want to also thank, INSA and AFCEA and everybody who helped put this event on today.
Thanks, Dave. Thanks, Carrie. And Ricky, you've seen significant change in your rich career in military and civilian sectors. Can you connect with the crowd and help them connect with you on your background?
Sure. Thank you again, General Brown, and to AFCEA and all of you here today. It's good to be here. My aperture has been in various fields of view, as you indicate throughout my career, starting off in the Marine Corps, both enlisted and as an officer in the combat arms and aviation, and in program space, Marine Corps Systems Command, developing weapon systems throughout my career there. The vast majority of the career thereafter has been in defense in some form. As a program manager for DRS at Finmeccanica in Italy, then VP at Raytheon for 13 years, in the space and airborne systems and the missile systems arena as it consolidated throughout its career, throughout its history. Boeing as a VP in the Boeing Government Services and Defense and Space and Security. Then a president at Honeywell in defense and space. I see some of my colleagues from Honeywell here today. And now in a commercial setting, as it were, with Amazon, launching this very ambitious 3,236 satellite constellation that is specifically, in my world, focused on government assets, focused on building government capabilities in some very unique ways that I believe are going to be long-term disruptive. So I've been able to see this part of the industry always in space in some form, both in uniform and in the defense sector, and now in this non-traditional defense space, giving me, I think, some rather interesting perspectives, in some cases jaded, in some cases extremely excited about where we can go, where we should go, and how I think we implement some of the disruptive changes that are going to be necessary to truly create this domain that we call space as a warfighting arena. So I look forward to the conversation and to the activities and technologies that will come as a result.
So we'll start off with our first hard question. It's actually a soft pitch. We've danced around it just a little bit. Warfighter support. So from the perspective of Southcom or EUCOM or pick any combatant command, we rely heavily on government and commercial space systems. And the example we talked about was with Ukraine. But that's not the only partner out there that may be in need. How effective are we currently with our commercial space services in meeting the needs of warfighters at the edge, where we're always in a coalition environment, or perhaps it's even a humanitarian assistance disaster relief scenario, where we're enabling life-saving activities that fundamentally need to be unclassified? How are we doing in that sector? Maybe you could tell me one thing we're doing well, each of you, and then what improvements are necessary in order to enable these life-saving activities or warfighting activities? What do we need to do better?
Me to start?
Sure.
Okay, great. When I was thinking about this, I always go back to the great John McLaughlin, and the quote from him is that the purpose of intelligence is to reduce uncertainty for decision makers, so reduce uncertainty. So I think about with Ukraine, what commercial imagery in particular was able to do is shareable with Ukrainian partner so that they can actually use it and action on it, shareable with allies and partners, frankly, shareable with fence sitters. It's hard to deny something is happening and not have to say something about it if the evidence is right before your face. Shareable with the public, and frankly, shareable with Russia as well, so that they could see we knew exactly what they were doing. But I also thought with Ukraine in particular, and you know this far better than I do, is for me, the power was, it was bringing together both the commercial capabilities as well as the government. So all of those commercial capabilities, plus, the government still has some pretty exquisite intelligence capabilities. They can really get after those hard targets, intent, the false flag discussion that the DNI disclosed. So bringing those two together, I thought was incredibly powerful. Bright spots for me, just speed and agility of the commercial sector. And you think about Starlink, and a tweet or an X led to delivery of Starlink terminals, and then under extreme jamming, and their engineers were able on the fly to make pretty quick adaptations and keep that service, keep folks on the ground connected. So I'm really hopeful that we'll see that here pretty soon out of Kuiper, as well as keeping, whether it's government, military, civilian population, keeping everyone connected. Shareability I talked about, but also I think a bright spot for commercial is prioritization. And thinking about your role back at Southcom is you were not top of the priority list, but you had partners that really needed capability for illegal fishing, maritime domain awareness, et cetera. And this is a bright spot, I think, where commercial can really contribute. So I'll pause there.
Thanks, Gary. Dave.
Great, yes, so definitely in the Ukraine conflict, the use of commercial remote sensing has been valuable for, its shareability with the coalitions, ability to influence public narratives, like Carrie said. And I think I want to take it one step further from just the raw data and say what I've seen going well lately is the capability for commercial industry to deliver derived product, information products to the edge and help the warfighter make those decisions in a timely fashion. And some of the best products are continuous monitoring of military activity, so that there's some tip-off, some alert to changes in behavior. And that can be accomplished now with a combined virtual constellation of imaging systems and RF collectors. And so that's gone well. What I'll say hasn't gone well is almost the other side of the coin for commercial remote sensing, is that it's still not timely enough. We need to get faster. We need the latency down. The constellations should revisit faster. Optical communication links can deliver faster. We're close, but we're not fast enough.
Thank you. Ricky.
I agree. So I think what I've seen, and we spend an enormous amount of time behind closed doors talking about these issues and making sure that these issues inform our technology. And several of the things that I've seen is that we're doing well bringing commercial solutions for, shall we say, throughput over here, and commercial solutions for resilience, and commercial solutions for coverage, and commercial solutions for security. All of these are good, but they are, in my mind, siloed and sequential and serial in nature, but have not captured the underlying need for networking, as you've articulated. How do we bring it all together? How do we bring the capabilities together in a serial, in no longer a serial mechanism, but an overall architecture, a fundamental baseline networked architecture that allows all of these capabilities to thrive in that environment where data is moving at the speed of relevance and it's connected. The interconnectivity, I think, is what's ultimately going to be the most important part. We've gotten, I think, much better at moving data, petabytes, exabytes of data, but not so much doing it at scale, at speed, and across all domains, sea, air, land, space, and cyber. That becomes the baseline, I think, for what the future architectures need to do, what they need to think, how they need to think, leveraging artificial intelligence, leveraging machine learning to connect all of these capabilities that we're bringing to market. The ability to do that is not easy. Obviously, if it were, we would have done it by now. But it does become the baseline for what I think the future needs to look like. So again, we're doing well in these individual pockets of capability. But ultimately, we have to sit down and focus on how we do it all in an organized, certainly a JADC2 type environment, or CJADC2 now environment, that allows all of these capabilities to move the warfighter out to the tactical edge and beyond.
Thank you. Let's talk about global competitiveness just a little bit. And coming off of the Summer Olympics that we just finished up, Dave, back in 2021, while you were still at NGA, you produced a commercial imaging Olympics report that compared and contrasted capabilities available on the international market. How does the U.S. compare with other nations in leveraging commercial space capabilities for defense intelligence these days? And what steps can be taken to maintain or enhance the U.S. competitive edge in space while also leveraging allied contribution and our coalition intel requirements?
Wow, well, I'm glad you brought that up because it's been 3 years and we just went through another Summer Olympics, and wasn't the Paris Olympics amazing? That was fantastic. So a lot of people have asked for that commercial imaging Olympics to be redone. And thankfully to a group of nonprofit organizations, CSIS with Carrie, USGIF, Taylor Geospatial Institute, and Taylor Geospatial Engine, those 4 organizations were able to pull together the resources to reprise this analysis. And so I'm excited to announce that we've redone the work. And so the 2024 Commercial Remote Sensing Olympics is done, and the results will be announced on October 1st. And so if you've seen the product that was done in the past, it will come out again. And so it's exciting. Now, what was true in 2021 is still true today, and that is that the United States has all the ingredients necessary to maintain its dominance as the premier space power in the world and bring to bear the best commercial remote sensing systems ever imagined. So the ingredients are there. However, there are, I guess, stagnant elements of our bureaucracy that are slowing down progress, and our lead in commercial remote sensing is rapidly fading away. And so it's, this isn't the whole space industry. We're focusing like a laser on commercial remote sensing, but this is indicative of, our future economic security and the importance of controlling narratives in the world through understanding the Earth and the activities on it. And so it's of great concern to many people that, there's an opportunity for other nations to buy their remote sensing from whoever, is offering the best. And we want them to buy the best from the United States of America. We don't want them going elsewhere to buy their remote sensing information. So.
Yeah, thank you. So in that vein, I think NRO has over 10 years about $4 billion that have been primarily executed through Maxar, Planet, and Black Sky. They've been slower with other commercial space capabilities such as SAR, RF, multispectral, and they have a study. They're looking at what's the right formula going forward. But RF, for example, right now, Hawkeye 360, Carrie, you talked about in its impact in the fight in Ukraine, just illuminating the situation there. There's only about 300,000 per year, I think, laid out for RF. But what's the right mix? What can we do on the DoD and IC side in acquiring commercial space-based data and services better? How can the acquisition process be streamlined to better leverage these highly innovative capabilities that are coming online today and will come online tomorrow?
So I'm going to get in trouble with that question, but I believe streamlining is probably not the answer. I've kind of been doing this for various iterations, and I think when we began to talk about how we address space going forward, I think we need to be disruptive. I think we need to rethink acquisition, period. The acquisition process in and of itself, not the problem, because when you're thinking about multi-billion-dollar acquisitions, the process is necessary. Moments of pause. But we have multiple near-peer threats that we have to address now, and I think my biggest concern remains, and I articulate this to my team all the time, that if we go serial by serial, program of record by program of record, one capability after the other, when will I create enough critical mass to be impactful in space? How many technologies do I need to consider? What's the impetus? What's the thought process behind? As we go through the JSIDS process, as we go through the DoD 5000 process of identifying these capabilities, are we addressing this environment the way we need to? And in my mind, I believe we need to be disruptive. I believe, consider the long term of a scenario where space as a warfighting domain is created by the government and industry and the partners, and it becomes a domain in and of itself where all of the capabilities are built through RDT&E funding and through various other mechanisms of identifying those pain points, and that ecosystem is created, and the government becomes a tenant of, a customer of that ecosystem that we have built. How do we base it? How do we do it? And I think about it much like you would think about building an operating system, which we all are accustomed with, the iOS and the other operating system. We refine, define the goal, define the requirements, define what space must look like, define what the capabilities have to be, and then we build it. The ecosystem, the environment. And that then becomes the baseline where we populate that ecosystem with all of the technologies required to enable the warfighter, leveraging that enabling layer, as I call it, with all of the capabilities like a COM-SATCOM architecture in LEO, then the applications layer with all of the capabilities that are needed, and then the AI and ML layer that connects them all together, and the government becomes a tenant. Pulling those capabilities down as a service, where industry worries about the management and the warfighters worry about the mission. That's different. That's disruptive. That's where I think we need to go, because the alternative is step by step, product by product, and do we ever create enough of a critical mass where the warfighter is getting multi-orbital, multi-capable, secure, reliable, low latency capability at the speed of relevance in time to meet the threats of tomorrow. That's my thought, and I'm sticking with it.
Could I just build on that? I mean, I look, policy strategy, check. And the DoD, Space Force has released some good commercial strategies. The challenge now is the implementation of those. It's in the processes that we use, how we budget for these capabilities and services, the culture, and it's the whole gamut. It's everything from at that requirements stage early on, are you really incorporating commercial in at the outset, or is it a bit of an afterthought and bolt on later on? In the budgeting process, we're used to buying, and OMB is used to doing this, CAPE is used to doing this, Congress is used to doing this, but we buy end items. You have a procurement spike because you buy a satellite in a single year. We're now talking about services that really have this continuous drumbeat in a budget. So how do you do cost estimating of that? How do you actually put it in budget documents? But then also, and I think Ricky was getting at this too, is it's this integration, and I go back to the warfighter edge, like how do you fund integration and get it to be successful in a DMAG and through a whole budget process, integration to get all of those, the plumbing there to be able to get that data and information to the edge. And I remember when we were in the building, just getting an agency or a service to fund Air Force and Army DCGS integration at the data level was a pain in the butt because nobody wanted, it wasn't their core job to actually have systems talk to each other across services. So we ended up having to go in and direct it. But it's, how do you incentivize that integration, funding, and action as well?
Yeah, I want to offer, build on the acquisition part of this. And, I think Ricky is definitely correct that the requirements-based acquisition process has to be the process because you're going to build something that has never been built before and cannot be commercially viable. Follow that process. My personal opinion is we need a separate parallel process in order to do the services-based acquisition, to buy things that are available on the market, to be a tenant, to use the interoperable system that will be the infrastructure of space. And right now, we're completely out of balance between those two types of acquisitions. We're 99.9% build it and 0.1% buy it. And as space gets developed more and more by private industry, the buy should take precedence. And you said $4 billion, right? $4 billion sounds like a lot over 10 years. That's less per year than what was being spent on commercial imagery in 2011. We've gone backwards. And by this time, it should be $40 billion. Wouldn't it be wonderful if the government said, we'll spend $40 billion over 10 years on this commercial remote sensing, and then we'll go find out where the gaps are, and we'll go build those few things we need above and beyond that, right? That would be flipping the system upside down.
And can I say something on that? Because it's such an important point, and I don't want to lose it, and I promise I'm not advocating for Kuiper. But the idea here is critical, I think, in the long term. If you were to consider the concept, again, of an operating system being the foundation of everything that we do. Everyone in here largely likely has an iPhone or a Samsung. And that iPhone is merely the platform for all of the applications that you use. I imagine if everyone in here opened their iPhone, not one of you has the same applications. You pick the applications that are necessary, ones that are necessary to you, that meet whatever your mission is. And I think space needs to be considered in that same mindset of a marketplace. On Amazon.com or wherever you go shopping, vastly every time you're buying something, you're not buying an Amazon product, as it were. You're buying something from someone else that uses that platform to create an ecosystem of applications that you need. And we need to be thinking like that in space. If I have a platform like the satellite system that we're bringing to the fore, but we are actively, for example, working with industry. We're working with dozens of OEMs and non-traditional defense contractors who will build and host payloads in this ecosystem. And what are those payloads? They are specifically designed to meet a specific aspect of the warfighter need. If we can collaborate, collate, collect what that looks like with the warfighter engaged, if we're a part of the JSIDS discussions, part of the DoD 5000 discussions to identify what that ecosystem looks like, we work with industry to build those capabilities, launch them into the ecosystem. The benefit to the warfighter is this: they're not serializing programs of record that by the time it's fielded, it's already 10 years, 5 years outdated. Every time we launch a new capability, the warfighter gets access to the latest, the greatest technology. There's got to be something in that space that matters. That's disruptive. These are the things that I think are so important. The parts and pieces and components that you've indicated are missing, that's how we build it. We close those gaps, we launch it, we create this ecosystem of capabilities that I know the warfighter will benefit from. And again, I've been doing this a long time in various mechanisms, so what you hear in my voice is I think now is the time to do it, not talk about it. We have to begin having those kinds of conversations that change this domain and change the way we've done business for years to make sure the warfighter has what they need. That's all that matters to me. is that the warfighters have what they need.
Thanks, Ricky. Hear this opportunity in the conversation to raise a point here that came in from the audience on what government policy may be needed to shift. If we keep DD 5000 in the JCIDS process, if we do our traditional requirements generation process, maybe a decade in advance or years in advance of when an actual demand may occur, predicting the future where that warfight or humanitarian assistance requirement actually comes to light. Is there a possibility in a different funding model, a different ecosystem generation, where policy can play that helpful role in really achieving what you're describing, Ricky? And that's to any of you.
No.
I'll start. I guess one of the things that throughout my career has been a concern in every acquisition program and every capability that's been attempted to be delivered is the policy seems to be buy it first, worry about integrating it later. And it would be wonderful if there were policy requirements to focus on the integration of a capability first, so that the second you purchased it, it was immediately delivered to the end user in a way that was interoperable and usable at the edge, instead of trying to have people heroically figure that out on the fly when the time and the necessity was there. So if there were a policy shift, I think it would be focusing on integration. And I work at GXO, a space consultancy, and our thesis is about bringing more private space technology into national security, and that's all an integration story, right? How do you acquire and integrate? And so the integration is key.
Thank you. Here's another question that came in, and it's a true or false. The PRC has launched hundreds of high-end ISR military satellites in the past 2 to 3 years. And we'll look for that answer, true or false, from the audience or from the panel. And then the PRC is vastly outpacing or surpassing the US in space. So that's a question. Any thoughts?
So generally true. Oh.
No, please.
Okay. I mean, generally true is, and I'll credit Major General Greg Gagnon, who's Space Force S2 with this, but if you look at the last couple of years, 90% of the satellites that are launched within America are communication satellites. Over 50% of what China's been launching the last few years are ISR satellites. And I'd say there's a military dimension to that, but we are increasingly seeing China also launch their definition of commercial, but commercial remote sensing capabilities as well. And they have a military civil fusion policy. They're also interested in pursuing dual use capabilities and national security and economic benefits of space the same way we are. I think what's interesting and what really worries me is we're seeking to connect the world. China is taking its state surveillance model that's really perfecting on land and bringing it up into space. Mm-hmm. And there are implications for the military as well, as we've long had space superiority. We've long had, we fought for 20 years in Afghanistan and Iraq with air superiority. We are now at a point where we no longer have that luxury of, frankly, surprise, of maneuvering without being detected. And I think that's really going to change not just the space community, but really like the ground forces community, your community, of how do you collect intelligence? How do you fight? How do you maneuver? How do you do logistics when you are constantly being watched? And that's a very different paradigm for us versus the last 20 years. Mm.
Yeah, thank you. How and when do you see DoD, NGA, and the NRO moving to hybrid terminals to increase the timeliness of imagery provided to fielded military forces?
Yeah, by hybrid, I assume we're talking commercial and defense.
I think that's correct. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we certainly want to accelerate that. It is, in fact, the primary component of our model, right? Kuiper is a government entity, at least my organization is, but it is also a commercial entity. And so a large portion of what we are thinking about in terms of the future is hybridization. How do we allow and create technologies that coexist and demonstrate to our customers that we can bring AES-256 encryption and NSA Type 1 enabling capabilities to demonstrate the security, but also focusing on technologies that are interoperable. We have a plethora of capabilities that we're bringing online that are very specifically demonstrating the capacity to provide commercial and defense capabilities simultaneously on the same platform. Our optical connectivity, as was mentioned earlier, is primary to this. Our space-to-X capabilities that have been demonstrated at speeds rivaling 100 gigabits per second of movement of data anywhere we want at speed, and drop it where we need it at speed. These kinds of interoperable capabilities in the form of waveform virtualization. How are we ensuring that we can move all kinds of military waveform traffic across our network? How are we focusing in on adaptive communications? We're building translator capabilities that allow us to speak to other satellite constellations into our satellite constellations, giving them that global broadband picture. How are we focusing on hosted payloads, where we're bringing any and all kinds of payloads into the ecosystem, into space, that allow C6ISR and other mission-critical applications? This is the focus. This has to be the focus of how we bring this capability to the marketplace, and we are actively engaged with the warfighters and the most senior leaders around the world to demonstrate these capabilities, because I think it is the only way truly that we bring commercial SATCOM into the space where it needs to be. It is important, however, that in order for us to be better and more efficient in doing what we do, is that commercial we have to get to a space where we're not seen as a provider of technology, but a partner. From the beginning to the end, we have to be involved, engaged, to ensure that our technology roadmaps are informed by the needs of the warfighter, so that we can build those roadmaps from the beginning to the end, not as an afterthought. And it really needs to be focused more on requirements as opposed to specifications. Define the problem so that we can build the solutions. That is our model. It is working. We just need more of it long term. Yeah.
Thank you. Dave, with your commercial services integration background at NGA, how did you vet and unpack the software used on the ground in space systems as we bring it into government to make sure that it hasn't been messed with by the adversary?
Well, that's a critically important part of the problem there. I think the best things we can do to get ahead of that problem are to provide excellent guidance on cybersecurity and physical security for companies that are starting out in space. And what I hoped we were able to do in NGA and still do is to partner early and often with companies when they're young, so that they understand exactly the importance of their security and their role in providing goods and services to our national security, and have the government assist them in protecting what they're doing. Yeah.
And here's another protection question. Carrie, can you talk about the emerging technologies, maybe the more sensitive ones, and when you were at USDINS, and certainly from the think tank perspective now, and how do we protect them? How do we wrap around them early? Because it may not just be software.
It's hard to talk about sensitive technologies now publicly, but I look at this in two ways. Is one, and as Dave and I have been looking at the state of, I'll say commercial remote sensing globally, we're kidding ourselves if we don't think that others around the world also have access to the same commercial technologies as we do. You're seeing that just diffusion overall and a much more competitive landscape. So there is a part of this where, I think as we look at our regulations, we look at export control restrictions, we need to keep in mind we don't have the market cornered on all of these, and we need to loosen those so that, frankly, we can make sure that our companies are more competitive globally. At the same point in time, and we got to see a lot of this, there are some pretty phenomenal high-end technologies out there as well, say hypersonics or others, leading edge areas that probably not much of a commercial market right now for hypersonics or whatnot, but those are the crown jewels that you still want to keep protected from China, who we know is actively targeting our industrial base, government, and academia in those areas. So it's not a it's hard to answer because I think there's nuance there that we need to have in terms of making sure that we have the right regulatory and export policy framework to allow our commercial capabilities to be more competitive, at the same time making sure, and I guess this is the same debate that we had a decade ago and plus, of making sure that we build those high fences around that really exquisite high-end technology.
Thank you. Ricky, with your maritime military career and your background in maritime domain awareness, operational maneuver from the sea, what are the gaps and strengths in remote sensing for maritime domain awareness? And should be an overlap between maritime sensing and ecological analysis?
So the answer is yes. And it's a good question because one of the things that we are convinced of, and I think it's a given, that sensors will continue to proliferate across all domains, which is a good thing. But the response that needs to happen is that the more sensors proliferate, the greater the density of data that we have, the more requirement for artificial intelligence, right? Humans on the loop, but artificial intelligence to help distill, process, and action that data. In this particular space, it's all the more important because in the maritime environment, in the Indo-Pacific environment, the environment that we face, the existing near-peer threats, you're talking about a scenario where there's more decentralization in the maritime environment, and the need to be able to move data faster, to compress the decision to action chain is all the more important. And the ability to move data in remote and austere environments, this again being a clear requirement in the maritime space, once again highlights the importance of how quickly we can access information, how much information we can access, and how smart we can be about processing that information. From the standpoint of how that translates into the ecological environment, and again, it depends on the nature of the question, but much of what we are talking about doing in the warfighting domain certainly has carryover in the very same domain you're talking about. Near-Earth observation and ecological awareness, and how do we use these same sensors, these same capabilities that we would use to prosecute conflict, but also for space domain awareness, for various other mechanisms that we can use for weather analysis and emergency disaster awareness. All of these technologies have those adjacencies that is what I think creates the excitement about the technologies we're bringing to the marketplace, because they are not single use. They have multiple uses. We are actually focusing, as my team knows, on a core of applications that have multiple uses across multiple domains beyond the warfighting domain. And so I think there's definitely a carryover between the two. Yeah.
Thank you. David, how do multinational commercial GEOINT capabilities help with intelligence sharing, and are there any challenges with interoperability and integration with U.S. systems? Or is there an advantage if it's a partner capability, non-U.S.?
Well, there's always advantages to partnership, and
That's a good question.
and working in coalition environments. The interesting thing about commercial space is that many nations who can't or could not have their own national ISR constellations are now creating their own sovereign constellations out of commercial capabilities. And those commercial capabilities come fully shareable, right? They're starting to become more interoperable. The communication pathways, both on land and in space, are becoming real time. And so it's very easy for a nation to create out of whole cloth a very sophisticated ISR capability from space, and then interoperate that with what the US brings to the table as well. There's certainly some integration challenges between national and commercial systems. I think some experience we've had is that it's easier to integrate at the edge with information as opposed to raw data, back where it's landed. So if we can start by running some field exercises at the edge and integrating information at the timely point where the warfighter needs to make a decision and work backwards, that might help. And I think we've seen that in some coalition engagements recently. Yeah.
Excellent. And we're down to the last couple questions here, and then we'll let you give closing comments. But what alliances does the U.S. need to further build to counter China's aggressive behavior in space? And I would just offer, it could be international alliances, true treaty allies. It could be partners, to include public and private. But any thoughts?
Both. Well, and actually, I just put out a report last week looking at U.S.-Japan space security cooperation, and just to use that as an exemplar, the Japanese have come so far in their space security policy, from having a non-military purpose to it to now actually policy, funding, senior leader priority, significant resource going into space, and they want to collaborate with U.S. industry, with government, whether it be on ISR GEOINT, space situational awareness, SATCOM, missile warning, you name it. So there's just tremendous opportunity globally among so many partners. And again, I'd much rather have, whether it be partnering at the development production level, or even from a data services perspective, I'd much rather have third-party countries buy from U.S. companies than to go to China. But then also, there, as you mentioned, there's incredible partnership at all levels of the private sector. And we spend a lot of time talking about commercial and some of these startup companies, but we need to make sure, we do have this tremendous defense and aerospace industry, traditional industry as well. And I think we need to see more partnerships across the bigs and the smalls as well.
Any final comments for the group? Ricky?
No, I would agree with that. I think the internal partnerships among industry, commercial, defense, and DoD is critical. Internationally, we are, again, actively focused on those areas that are most important to them. Consider many of the island nations around the world that have fiber replacement issues or fiber resiliency issues. There are so many solution sets we're finding that we did not consider in our initial analysis. But there are so many ways that we can help, bring the unconnected portions of the world into the fore that is good for everyone, right? So there are 2 + 3 billion people, I believe, around the world that are not connected. If you can believe that, 3 billion people not connected. The benefit that we can bring to humanity just by ensuring these, that they're brought into the global economy, I think is just a great thing for all of us.
Dave?
I'll just say partnerships with new sectors that don't normally work with space capabilities at all, who will find benefit from that in a huge way. I'm incredibly excited about the number of Earth observation systems being launched every week, and seeing more and more data, and what that means for the world in terms of better understanding of the planet, the activities on the planet, how that can help impact decisions. And it changes sectors from, ecology to infrastructure, insurance, marine life, everything you can imagine. And what we saw happen with GPS being widely used across all of, industry and humanity, we will see with Earth observation as well. So it's very exciting.
Thank you so much to each of you. Thanks to the audience for asking some good, tough questions. Admiral.
Yeah, and how about a round of applause for this panel, our moderator? It's never good to look on the agenda and see like we are following lunch, but I will tell you, we were walking around, we were looking around, and people were engaged, they were involved, nobody was sleeping, so you did a great job. A couple of admin notes as we break from here. These things don't just miraculously come into existence. This is a lot of work from a lot of people. So if you can do me a favor when you're walking around, just thank the people that are making this work, right? The people who are walking around, taking your questions, running our sound system, doing the food, all this stuff. It really is a team of team efforts, and thank and engage, right? Take the opportunity to engage with the experts that we have here. One key theme that you should be taking away from this, right, is we cannot do this alone, right? We need to be able to tap into what our nation's true strength is, which is our humans and our partnerships. Deliberate design by INSA and AFCEA in putting this together has this next section, 30-minute networking. Those of you who have seen me at these events before, networking means like meeting people you don't know, right? So I challenge each and every one of you to meet at least 3 people that you don't know, exchange contact data, and then actually contact each other like a week from now, right? Because that will start to build those relationships we have and we so desperately need to be successful in what we do. So there's a 30-minute networking break right now, meet people. Great plenary session coming up back in the ballroom, right, where we're going to come together for about an hour and 15 minutes and talk about the next generation of national security, right? Technology at speed and scale. That ought to excite you. Another networking break in between, meet people, right? And then a great plenary session. Carrie, you mentioned Greg Gagnon. He's going to be here along with some of the other service intel leadership, and they're going to be on the stage for about an hour and 15 minutes. And then a happy hour, right? Another opportunity to meet each other. So we also thank all of you for being here, for what you're doing here with your time, right? Because what you spend your time doing matters, or at least it should, right? And we look forward to not only seeing what you do here, but more importantly, what we do collectively in the future. All right, go meet people. Thanks.